Hi everybody, welcome to my stream. I'm going to try to pack as much information into as little time as possible for this. This is a live recording demonstration video, so there might be some dead air every now and again. I apologize if that happens. That's why there's the public domain music in the background. How's the levels on that? Let me check. Okay, it's not annoying. So I'm going to give an overview of my asset production workflow within Blender. This will not be exhaustive because each part of this workflow could be a long demonstration in itself. I mean, you've got to learn to do painting, you got to learn to do sculpting, you got to learn all the different things. And the real motivation behind this is I've got a friend that's doing a project and she's got a deadline. So hopefully this will help her with her project. She's doing some game assets that are going to be somewhere in the style of Blizzard and Torchlight, and she's got to make some textures for them. Normal map, specular map, albedo map, all that stuff. So I'm going to show my process and how I do that particular part of the workflow, since she's already got models. Wow, well, I'm living in Florida, so it just started raining as soon as I started recording this. Wow. Apologize about the rain sounds. My sense of style might not be exactly in the Blizzard Torchlight area, but she's not going to have that problem because she's a brilliant painter. So don't get upset with me if my style is a little bit off, since getting it perfect would make this a longer demonstration. So my main purpose with this is to show the tools to use, which tools to use, when, and why. And the why is the most important part. I'll get into that a little bit more later. First, I want to say why I'm using Blender. And specifically as far as the game asset workflow goes, when you're making games, you're going to be in one of two situations, really. I mean, there's other situations besides this, but mostly you're either going to be an indie studio or in a large studio, a AAA studio, maybe. If you're working in a big studio, the main thing is getting the deliverable in on time to the correct level of quality. And the main reason to use Blender in that case is because it's your preferred tool, because it's portable, because there's no license hassles, and I'll get into that in a second. But if you're an indie studio, there are some major advantages, especially in the area of budget. You're probably not going to have a huge time budget or a huge money budget if you're in an indie studio. And even if you do have a large budget, you want to focus as much as you can on giving your limited team the most hours you can to work on the game. Blender becomes a major advantage for a small indie studio simply because everybody has access to it all the time. It's free and open source, it's portable, and there's no license hassles created by, you don't have the right license to use it on this machine. You have to transfer the license, you have to activate the license, you have to run the utility in the background that wastes your resources to periodically check if your license is valid. You never have to be online to use it. All that stuff is just not a problem with Blender. In fact, you can put it on just about any flash drive made within the past 15 years and plug it into just about any computer made in the last 15 years, and you won't have any trouble getting it to run. Now, it depends on which version of Blender you're using. The newest one is probably not going to run on something 15 years old, but it'll run on something 10 years old, no problem. So, and of course, I would argue that my fastest workflow is in Blender, and yours could be too if you practice. So, let's get into it. Refresh my screen. Cool. Alright. So, I've made a quick copy of the asset that my friend is using. This isn't the same asset, I didn't steal it from you. And I certainly didn't go out and buy an asset pack just to make this demonstration. I don't like you that much. Go ahead and hide this guy because I don't need him. I've already modeled it and UV'd it. Just show you the UV map right here. So this is what I'm going to be painting on. Notice I've got a reuse UVs and a unique UVs. The reuse UVs is symmetrical, where each side of the thing is using the same UVs, so I only have to paint once on each side. and the unique gives it a unique texture coordinate, so that I can paint in details and stuff that's not repeated, that's not symmetrical. I usually export the final asset just with the unique UVs, but while I'm painting, I like to have I like to model it myself, and I like to make a reusable UV map like this and a unique UV map, so that I can well, I'll show you how it speeds up my workflow when I get into texture painting. The first part of this demonstration is going to be sculpting. And the reason why you have to sculpt first is because the sculpture is where you get your high quality normal map from. Obviously in a game you have to have the low poly asset, but it won't look as low poly if you use a normal map. You could even use something like a parallax occlusion map to make it look more, to make the geometry look more realistic than it is, more detailed than it is. That's a common trick that people use in games. It's like a fake displacement map. And you also want it to react to ambient occlusion, well, and you want your texture to be based on the shape of the object. So it's better to sculpt first. So let me pop over to the sculpting tab. And as it is, it's not much use because I don't have a lot of geometry. And also I'm working on the original. I don't want to work on the original. Let's move this to a new collection. And you can see the keys I'm using in the bottom left there. We're going to call this source geometry because these are our original. Let's just call it original geometry. Cool. Now I'm going to duplicate this guy. Move the duplicate into sculpt geometry collection. Gonna hide the original geometry collection up here. Don't need to see that right now. I do want to see this guy. So now, like I said, sculpting this isn't much help, as you can see, because I don't have a lot of geometry to work with. In Blender, we use a multi-resolution modifier to remedy this. Now what the multi-resolution modifier is it's exactly like a subdivision surface modifier, which does this, except what it does is it creates geometry that is sort of in layers that you can move back and forth in, and each of these layers can be sculpted to affect the layers on top of it. So it's really great when you're working with characters if you've got a good base mesh, since you can focus on the big details and then work on the smaller details. I'm not working with a character right now, but you can see how it's got almost a layer-based effect. And if I were to do something small that won't show up in the previous layers, you know, the lower resolution layers, doesn't affect the shape. So this is a good way of getting as much detail as you need, and obviously we don't want it to look this hideous, so but I need to explain what the modifier is first, obviously. Now, something that can cause problems is when you've got a whole bunch of different sized faces. This one is pretty close to even size for each face, but you see we've got a really big face right here and a smaller face here, and it's a little bit uneven. So for the sculpture, let's add some divisions by hitting Control R while we're in edit mode. And I'm using a pin, so put that down. And we can make it a little bit more even. Don't worry about it too much, because the way we're going to be working today is we're going to be working sort of high to low, if that makes sense. We're going to be creating a high poly asset and then baking all of the important details down to a low poly asset, so the low poly asset looks as good as the high poly asset without all the extra texture and geometry detail. So now that we've fixed the geometry a little bit, and you can do that for as long as you want to, as much as you want to, just be careful not to change the UVs, And so there's a few edits that you can make to the mesh without damaging the UVs. You can dissolve edges if they are within an. You can dissolve vertices if they're within a face that's all in the same UV, but don't do it on a border like that because that'll screw up the UVs. And you can add divisions. You can subdivide. You can loop slide as long as you go over here and said correct UVs. And in fact, I think I'm going to do that. Maybe add one here and here. That part's a little bit ugly. So we're going to leave it how it is though, because it doesn't really matter. Ooh, actually, let's do that. It's not exactly even in size now, but like I said, it doesn't really matter. Especially because we're going to be seeing the outside of this guy the most. And we're going to throw away all the stuff we don't need later. Now you might look at me and say, you're wasting time making a whole bunch of detail you won't be using. But you're actually wasting time fighting with a really low poly mesh and trying to make it better than it is. There's a lot of reasons why I like working this way. And of course, feel free to change your own workflow when you're working. Now, when we use the multi-resolution modifier, it's going to smooth it. You can fix that a couple of ways. Go ahead and just delete those. So you can just set it to sharp, and it subdivides it sharp, but it's still not working very well. Let me see if I just have to make a new copy of it. Ugh, I'm not used to doing these streams, it's making me nervous. Even though I know nobody's watching. But you will be watching later on the YouTube. Yeah, that must be a bug or something. I should report that. But when you set it to sharp, it shouldn't... Oh, that's what I'm doing wrong. You set it to simple. Set it to simple, and you want to set it to smooth, keep corners. That's the UVs, this one is the geometry. I just had it mixed up. So subdivide it simple, but as you can see, something you can change back and forth. So I want to use Catmull Clark because it's nice and smooth, but I don't want it to affect this shape so much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete it again, go into edit mode, and I'm just going to press Shift E and crease everybody a little bit. Let's try 0.9. Now if we subdivide it, it's using the creases, so it's only going to smooth it out a little bit. This is going to do a lot to help the help us with our normal bake just by itself. You can see I have auto smooth normals on, and what that does is when you set it to shade smooth, it makes it so that it's smooth up until a certain angle threshold, and then it splits it. I should have mentioned that earlier. But because we're subdividing it, we don't really need that. You can see what it looks like without auto smooth. You turn on auto smooth, and it keeps beveled edges and stuff smooth like that. But the great thing about the multi-resolution modifier, when we crease all the edges a little bit, is it creates little bevels for us, and it's not 100% even, so we're gonna have to fix that with the sculpt, especially in areas like this. But it's a lot better than just leaving it on simple. When we subdivide, I'm gonna go ahead and subdivide it a little bit more. It's actually kind of starting to cause problems there, but that's okay. We'll fix it in the sculpt. And it's got kind of an interesting look to it. So before I start sculpting, I want to show you how to get... I want to show you some stuff about brushes, because the brushes that you use affect your style quite a bit. I tend not to use any brushes when I sculpt because I'm just doing organic shapes and I need stuff to be round and smooth, so I don't want to have a lot of texture. At least not until the end of the process. But since we're doing static shapes and there is very specific recognizable texture, then we want to go ahead and get our brushes right now. So there's a few places you can get brushes online. Most of the ones I'm going to be using I got on blendswap.com. You have to make a free account with BlendSwap, but it doesn't cost you anything, and you're probably going to be using it from time to time. It's a great place to get free assets, and they all tell you what the license is, so you can keep reusing them when you want to. And some of them are even CC0 licensed, like this one by Ben Simmons. Thank you, Ben. Sorry, I'm a little bit short of breath. I'm not used to streaming. It makes me nervous. Some of them are CC0 licensed, which means you can just give them to whomever you want without credit, anytime, anywhere. Some of them are attribution license, which means that you can use them for whatever you want to, but if you redistribute or modify the brushes themselves, you have to give credit. But it doesn't mean that you have to give credit to the brushes in your final product. I think I would recommend reading the licenses a little bit before you go and use them, but from the way I understand it, it means you can use them for anything, and if you redistribute the brushes themselves or modify the brushes, you have to give credit to the original author if you redistribute the brushes. Okay. Sorry, my nose is a little stuffy, so I might be a mouth breather right now. I hate myself if I am. But the brush packs I'm using here are mostly going to be Isanu Karmardine. I apologize since I know I pronounced your name wrong. IK's brushes, which are on Blender Nation. If you just search Blender Brush Sculpt, you'll find them. I use DuckDuckGo. Blender Brush Sculpt. And search IK Sculpt brushes. It's the first hit. The other one that I'm going to be using is the Orb brushes, which have been converted from ZBrush to Blender. And these were made by a senior environment artist at Blender, Michael Vicente? So especially if you're doing that Blizzard Torchlight style, these are going to be really good for you because they're what they actually use at Blizzard. So definitely check these out. My friend, if you're watching this, which I hope you are because, you know, otherwise I'm kind of doing it for nothing. That was a joke. I'm not used to doing this. I'm sorry for the dead air. And I'm also maybe will be using this one. This is a good one for textures. I don't like to do a lot of texture when I sculpt, like I said earlier, so you might use it, you might not. And these are 3 very simple brushes, and they're great for what they are. They're really simple. It doesn't hurt to download them. So once you download them, I always put them in a specific library folder, and I've got like a Documents Blender section in my Documents folder, and then within my Blender documents I've got a library. And you can bring the brushes into your project by linking them or appending them. Doesn't really matter which one you do. I'm gonna start by linking them, and I can append them if I need to later on. And what that means is the linked file stays in the other blend file, and it doesn't get saved with your file, it just grabs it from the other file whenever it's loaded. If you append it, then it copies the data into your blend file and saves it with it. Which I don't want to do because it's better to have all my brushes in one place instead of scattered throughout all kinds of different blend files. So I'm going to go ahead and grab all the ones that say orb. Press B and do that. Yes, those are the ones I want. And I modified a few of the brushes in my brush pack because there's a couple of things that I like about them. So they might not be exactly like what you get when you download it immediately. I'll show you the differences, though. The changes I made, if I use those brushes. These settings don't matter, so just link that from your library. And now, in the tools, they're going to be... They're going to be in the, it's a little bit different in Blender 2.8, the way the tools are set up. It's unfortunate, but not exactly sure where all of them are going to show up. Some of the really good ones are here in Scrape Peaks. That clay brush is nice. These clay strip brushes are pretty great. These are all for adding texture, and they're pretty good, but they need a lot of mesh detail. What were they? Inflate? Layer? Well, I'll show you how I make some of my brushes too in a second. Let me also grab the ones from... I'm sorry that this is taking a while. Let me also grab the ones from IK. These are really good ones. Brush. And... yeah, I want all of these. Another good thing about linking them rather than appending them is you can just get rid of them if turns out you don't like them by unlinking them. And that's something I end up doing because I don't like being confused because I've got 100 different brushes. I like to stick to 5 or 6 brushes and not think about my brush settings very much. But you might be the kind of person that likes to use a lot of brushes, which is why I showed you the blend swap site. It's a big help to have a lot of different brush settings. Now the Ben Simmons brushes are Rake, Rasp, and Scrape, Crease. One more. Where is it? Slash. Rape, Rasp, and Slash. The rest of them are the default brushes. You don't want to link those in because you've already got them. So now that I've got my brushes linked in, if it annoys you that it changes a little bit while you're moving the camera, I believe that's in your view option. Well, that's in this option setting up here. Fast navigate. You can turn that off and it'll stay the same when you move. I like it. It's a little bit of a performance improvement. So let's start by using the orb brush. I made an edit of the orb brush that, open my tool settings here, just adds a simple clouds texture to it. And so it just adds a little bit of texture to it. Doesn't look like I have enough. There we go, that's better. Alright, it looks like creasing it's not gonna work for that. Sorry, I must have led you astray. Just gonna uncrease everybody. And delete that. And here's how I'm gonna solve that. I'm gonna subdivide it a couple of times in edit mode. And now I'm gonna subdivide it and it's clean. I didn't want to do that, but it doesn't really matter if you do it or not. This just smooths it out a little bit more than I wanted it to. And it's a little bit different than the original geometry, but that doesn't matter, because the UVs are the same. So any texture we create on it will still apply to the original. Oh, I put my pen, there it is. So let's get started sculpting it. The first thing I'm going to do is... I'm not in sculpt mode. The first thing I'm going to do is switch to sculpt mode. So select the object and switch to sculpt mode. first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten up these corners a little bit. And you can do that by using the crease brush. I usually use the crease brush. Hold Control. Oh gosh, what am I doing? Let's set a symmetry up, so we don't have to do this 4 times. Mirror it on X and Y axis. See how it's affecting over here also, and it's affecting the far corner too. Sorry, my face itches there. Apologize if that's making sounds. So we don't want to do this 4 times. Let's just set up symmetry right away. And it's okay if it's a little bit wonky. It's going to be uneven. It's a stone. It's not perfect. It was made by someone with tools, not by a machine. Made by hand tools. Might even hit that with the inflate brush a little bit to make it a little fatter. And flatten it out some. Flatten. No, it doesn't look good. Crease brush really does me good every time I use it. Let's give it some stone brick. And we could use that we're in clay strips. We could use one of these guys that we got from the orb texture pack. Choose halfway between where you want it to. Hey, what's the big idea? I don't know why this one's not working. That's kind of weird. That one's not working either. Maybe I should have appended them earlier. No, it doesn't do anything. Huh, I'm not really sure why it's not working. They were made for a previous version of Blender, so maybe that's all that's going on. Sorry about that. So I'm going to keep using the crease brush for this then. And see that little black preview? That's what your brush looks like. And if you want to change what the crease brush looks like, and I often do, I go over here to fall off, and I try to make it a little sharper. You can see the difference that makes. Let's use the blob brush. Create a little bit of stone detail here. A little bit of pushing out to make it look more like a... Oh wow, that's awful. This is why I usually sculpt in with flat shading, even if I don't plan on using flat shading in the end. Oh my. Wonder you're really... Oh, no, that was my fault. I'm not really sure how it was my fault, but it was my fault. Sorry about that. Need to make sure I haven't... I pressed the wrong button there. Wondering why it wasn't showing up earlier. Just set it shade flat. I tend to like to sculpt with flat shading. I can't really see it because it's such a high resolution right now. But since we're adding detail, it's okay to start at a high resolution. So if you want to add a texture to the brush you're using, first make a copy of it so you're not modifying the original by hitting that number right next to it. Blob clouds, because I'm going to add a clouds texture. Oh, sorry. Hit new. Set it to clouds. Let's call it clouds.00. big. Maybe kind of detailed. I like to use one of the 409 textures. Not that one. This one. Now you can see what it's doing. It's a little bit more than I want it to do though. So over here in view plane, let's change that to 3D. And just a little bit of auto smooth on that. I don't need to sculpt with that much detail just yet. And it's kind of hard for my computer to stream this while working on all this. You hold shift down to smooth it out. Stream's not going super well, I apologize for that. But let's try to make the edges kind of sharp and bevelly. And I really like these, in the scrape peak brushes, I really like these orb brushes for this. They're really good at creating sort of blocky, stony. Well, actually I like the way that looked. Sometimes I like to use the flatten contrast brush, add texture. I'll make a quick crackle brush here to show you that. Oh man, I feel like I'm gonna sneeze. Apologize if I actually do. Let's coloring position. And oh, that's not what I wanted. Increase the strength, add contrast, or flatten. Yeah. Do that to 3D first. There we go, that's doing what I want now. Not really enough detail. It doesn't have to be great, because this is just a demonstration, but when you're watching it after the fact, you can fast forward through this part, because you don't need to see all of it, you just need to have the finished result. But it might help you to see how I work, if I actually do it right. Gosh darn it. Keep making mistakes, and because I'm under pressure, I'm not used to streaming while I do stuff. And I know there's nobody watching it, but I can hear myself. Maybe I'm just putting the pressure on myself. That's kind of silly. But you can kind of see where what I'm doing here. Oh, and that annoying dots thing, the reason it's doing that is because the spacing on my brush, just like in Photoshop, you got spacing in this, guys. Way too high. There we go. Now it's a lot smoother. And I think one of these, that might be the one I'm looking for. I like the way this one looks. This is from the IK brush pack. Oops. Oops. There wouldn't be a vision there. If you were really working for Blizzard at this point, you wouldn't do this part symmetrically, you would add some asymmetry in the details here. As they always do, and that's one of the reasons why their style is so good. I'm not gonna bother though. because I'm working for myself. Yeah, that looks a lot better when you use this brush. Should have been using it earlier. The music, in case you're interested, is Brahms' Requiem, and I chose it because it is public domain, and I don't have to pay anybody for it. Hopefully, probably find out I'm wrong and have this video taken down from YouTube, but hopefully I'm not wrong about that. Great music. Usually I'm not much of a classical fan, but got a soft spot for Brahms. And it helps me ignore my own halting speech, and I gotta practice this kind of streaming stuff. It's fun. I just need to do it more often. Let's do this. And also, I would recommend, if you're doing a lot of let's just make this guy a lot bigger. This clouds texture. Make it local. Make it local. That's why you usually append your brushes, but most people just append them, but I usually just link them because I can make them local if I need to, and I usually don't need to, but if I do that, then I can. And this is the flatten edge brush from Orb, except I added a clouds texture to it. It's the only thing I changed. And as you can see, I'm not trying to do a great job on the style, I'm just trying to demonstrate some bits about my workflow. So it's not going to be super awesome in terms of style, especially just because I'm doing everything with symmetry. Usually, usually I wouldn't be doing as much in symmetry right now. Let me change back to my Crackles brush, and I'm going to turn on some auto smooth for this guy. Maybe not that much auto smooth. Since I had it mapped to 3D earlier, it's actually going to work the same all over the mesh. You know, I don't have to worry about it looking different every time I go back over it. And that's something that you can only really get with procedural textures, like the Voronoi or the clouds texture. And this is probably not what you want to do in your own asset, but I'm just doing it to make it, to quickly add some shape, because we're going to see it when we bake the texture later. But if you want to change the size of the crackles, making this smaller will make the crackles bigger. Which is a little weird, but that's just how it works. You gotta trust me on that. And normally I don't do a lot with texture, like I said. I use a few simple procedural textures. I mostly use the default brushes in my own work, because when I use other people's brushes, or when I don't use the default brushes, I just get distracted by all the different possibilities and screw around, and I end up getting too distracted to keep working. But these brushes, as you can see, give you some pretty good results right away. If you're just kind of smart about how you use them. And it's probably not necessary to use such a high resolution when you're doing this. As you can see, the performance isn't really great right now, and I'm not sure why that is. It's probably just because of the symmetry that I'm working with. But it's also probably because I'm streaming. If you have access to like ZBrush or something, that's what a lot of people use. And you can use those orb brushes in ZBrush. I think they're on the guy's Gumroad. They're obviously not on BlendSwap for that. Another texturized brush, and this one is going to be soft clouds. And I'm gonna move on to the next stage pretty soon because I don't really need this to be great. I just wanted to show a little bit of the sculpting workflow. And I think instead of 3D, I'm gonna set this one to tiled. Really, you can get a lot of texture in the big shapes, and that's as important as getting small surface textures. In fact, it's more important because the surface texture can be done more easily just by oops, that's not what I want to do. I want to make it smaller, not bigger. Flatten instead of contrast. You can get a different effect. But I don't really like what that does. Oops. I also like to set this flatten to do a little bit of jittering. So the brush moves a little bit, and it gives it a slightly different texture. And my friend that is working on texturing an asset right now, I expect she'll be a lot better at sculpting than I am right now, because I'm just doing something quick and bad. And I mean, of course it takes a while to learn, but maybe some cracks on the edges there. But man, that symmetry looks kind of bad on the edges. You don't want to use symmetry in the middle ever. You only want to use it on the sides where it's not going to be noticeable. But it would take me 4 times as long to do this demonstration. And let's just say we like this. I don't. I think it's terrible. But I was mostly trying to demonstrate the brushes and which one am I using here? Could have been using this one. I like this one. Alright, let's oops. Keep keep telling myself I'm just gonna pretend like I'm happy with this. Then I go back and make it worse. I'm just trying to create any texture at all, just so you'll be able to see it later. And like I said, if you're watching this after the fact, feel free to skip through this part. And I'll try to put some timestamps for you to make it take less time. We're just gonna save it like this. So don't apply the modifier just yet. You're probably gonna be an Eevee if you just open Blender up. Whoa, that looks bad. What happened there? I must have done that. Let's fix that real quick. To a lower sculpting level and just smooth it out. You don't know how that happened. I must have done something pretty weird there. And as you can see, it transfers up. Oh, it's so horrible. It's not important. It's good enough how it is. It's just fine how it is. So, when you're baking textures, you want to go over to your shading workflow, and you can kind of see how it looks like in the light. And hopefully the low poly version of this will look something like this. So, create a new material. We're going to be painting on this material in a little while, but we aren't going to do that right now. All we're going to do is create a texture and not attach it to anything. Use texture. Oh, what is this guy? Tower cat, I think is what I called it. Yes. Create a new image texture by hitting Shift A, image texture. It literally shows up in the 3D view, sorry about that. And hit new. Call this one Tower Cat. Normal. You don't need to number it. And depending on what size you're gonna use in the final game, you should talk to your asset manager or your director or something like that to find out. I'm gonna go ahead and make it at 2048 by 2048 because that's probably big enough that I can just reduce the size later on. This doesn't matter, but I like to set it like this. And choose 32-bit float. This will give it a higher dynamic range when it's baking down the values, and we're going to reduce that later for the game asset, but it will give us higher qualities later on down the line if we start at 32-bit float and then reduce it to an 8-bit texture. And don't connect this to anybody, just select them. Change your rendering engine to cycles. In the Bake tab, choose Bake from Multi-Res, and change your render samples down to something small just to test it and bake it. It's going to take a little while, so I'll take this chance to drink some tea. If it takes a super long time, I'm going to cancel it and use a lower resolution. Because it's taking a super long time, so that's no good. Yeah, I was... Also, make sure you set it back to shade smooth for this step. And the resolution you have it set to preview right now is the resolution it's going to use when baking. And you can see it was applied to the wrong normal map. or the wrong UV map, I'm sorry. Use this guy and hit the render icon next to it. Well, it doesn't actually matter since it's symmetrical, so if you sculpted it asymmetrically, make sure you don't use a symmetrical UV map to bake it. But if you sculpted it symmetrically, then it's fine to use the symmetrical UV map. Anyways, let's see what this looks like when we apply it to our low poly asset. Apply the sculpt geometry, grab our low poly guy. I'm probably gonna just edit this when I put it up on YouTube, but those spaces. Oh, we need to make sure to save this before we do anything else. So in here, click the hamburger, image, save as, and I'm gonna call this. You can either save it as a 16-bit PNG or as a EXR. EXR is going to preserve more detail, but you probably don't need that much. I'm going to go ahead and save it as a PNG. I like to set the compression to a high value. It's a lossless compression, so it just takes a little longer to save the file and to open the file, but it doesn't change the quality. It does lower the file size. Yes, and we're going to make sure to save it as 16 bits. We're going to probably keep it at 16 bits, but if that takes too much size, we can lower it to 8 bits later, and it will still be a better quality. Now color space, make sure, very very important, set it to non-color. And you can see what it does to the image. It's supposed to look like that. That's not good. Let's put in a UV map. There we go. Just make sure it's using the right UV map. And of course, you also have to put in a normal map node. Sorry about that. Shift A, go to vector, normal map. And you can even set the UV map there. Now you can see what it looks like, and that it's keeping the same general shape as the other guy. Now if you want to take this a little bit further, and improve it just a little bit more, we have to increase the amount of vertices we use. I would recommend beveling the corners if your asset is this low resolution, but I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. But you want to just make it look a little bit more like the sculpt. What I tend to do is use a shrink wrap modifier and a subdivision surface modifier, and set that to the sculpture, which is a copy of this one. This is Tower Cap 0, the sculpt is Tower Cap 1. And I use project, negative and positive. We can call back faces, it doesn't really matter, just choose whatever settings look the best. Set this guy to shade smooth, and auto smooth, good. But unfortunately, this does increase the amount of geometry we're using. So you may or may not be able to do that, you may or may not want to do that. But you can see the results of baking down the normals. And break that link real quick. If you're going to bake it again, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the amount of detail it's given me. Now that I see how it looks, I'm going to go back to the bake panel, I'm going to bake it, and bake. It's going to take a little longer this time. But not a lot longer. If there's noise in the normal map, if you zoom in and you see the noise, you have to increase the number of samples over here. But 8 should be enough. And go back to our original geometry. And you can see there's a little bit more detail in it now. Oh, make sure to save it. Save it. Whoa, that's oh, it's because I've got the shrink wrap. No, I like to rotate it around so I can see what the normals are doing. If it's not strong enough, you can increase the strength in this node, and your game engine or whatever is also going to have a strength control on the normals. And again, like I said, beveling the corners goes a long way to improving the texture. And in fact, we could use a bevel modifier to do that if we want to do it really quick and dirty. And so that's the way to get the nicer normals on there. There's a couple more things we're going to do that we're going to use in our texture painting process. But we're going to need the high resolution sculpt for that. So this is our sculpture. We're going to make a duplicate of the sculpture. I'm going to go ahead and apply the modifier. We're going to hide the original. Now the duplicate, if we go in edit mode, which is going to take a while because it's got a lot of vertices, you see that we can select everything. So that's exactly what we want. Let's go into vertex mode, vertex paint mode. Blender has got a really neat feature called dirty vertex colors, which I'll go ahead and show you what that does. Right now the vertex color layer that we're working on, that Blender creates as soon as you enter the mode, is perfectly white. Let's rename it to dirty, or dirt, lowercase. And this is going to take a little while. Dirty vertex colors. Since it's dealing with a pretty high resolution mesh, it just takes a while. But it's gonna help us a lot later, see, because it does this, which we can use as a mask in our painting. I'm gonna go ahead and tweak the result of this a little bit, and I'm gonna have to wait again. Unfortunately, it's not something that it can only compute at once. It takes a little while to compute it. But I'm going to do this to increase the contrast. Set the highlight angle to something closer to 90 degrees. 90 degrees is the minimum for the highlight. For the dirt angle, I'm going to set it to something higher than 90 degrees because 90 degrees is the maximum for that setting. Not really sure what that means. I'm not really sure what it does, but that's just how I usually set it because I like to increase the contrast a little bit. And as you can see, there's a blur strength setting and a blur iterations. So what that does is, after Blender computes the dirtiness of each vertex, it blurs it with its next door neighbor. And if you set the iterations to 1, then it only blurs it with the next neighbor. But if you set it twice, then it blurs it again after blurring it the first time, which ends up grabbing the next neighbor afterwards, basically. So it increases the size of the blur the more iterations you have. And the strength is, of course, the strength of the blur. And that's multiplied by the number of iterations. But I'm going to say that I'm happy with this. Now, if we want to save this to an image, what we got to do is we got to duplicate this image node by hitting Shift-D. Press the letter right next to it there. We're going to call this one Dirt. We're gonna leave it how it is. And now, the way we're gonna bake this is we're gonna use the dirty vertex color layer by creating an attribute. Press Shift-A, add an attribute node, type in dirt. And I do this all the time for all kinds of different stuff. Plug it right into the surface. Uncheck bake for multi-res. We're gonna go with emit. Make sure you have this texture selected and not the other one. You don't want to overwrite that one. And Non-color is fine, sRGB is fine. I think I'm gonna use sorry. Nope. Non-color is fine. Go ahead and bake it. You don't need more than 2 samples when you're baking an emission texture, because it just bakes the texture without any lighting or anything like that. The same goes for normals and the rest. You really don't need a lot of samples, but if for some reason it does look grainy, you can increase the number of samples, and it will increase the amount of time it takes to bake, but no biggie. Save that. And this dirt texture is just going to help us in the texture painting process later on. But just to verify that it's working, plug this guy in there and it's the same. And it does work. Cool. And we're going to bake one more thing. We're going to bake ambient occlusion. I don't use ambient occlusion a lot, so it might take me a couple of tries here. Oops. Use a diffuse shader for this. Or you can plug the principled shader back in, doesn't matter. We're going to use the principled shader later, so I didn't delete it. And 4, that's fine. Let's duplicate the texture again. Press the number again. Call this one occlusion. And make sure you saved the dirt texture, which I did, and you should too. Bake. Alright, that's pretty awful. And the ambient occlusion is affected by distance setting right here. So let's set that to something lower. Reduce the factor. And try again. I don't bake ambient occlusion very often, but it can be helpful, and if you're in a game, you probably are going to need it. Doesn't hurt to have a way of doing it quickly. That actually made it worse. And this might not actually affect it at all. I might just be completely mistaken. It also might be doing this because the sculpt is just bad, and if a better sculpt, maybe it won't do that. Or maybe I'm setting the distance to be lower when I should be setting it to higher. Anyways, I would recommend blurring this out a couple of times before actually using it. It's good enough for my purposes. Call this one occlusion. Alright. Now we're ready to start painting the image. And we want to do that on the sculpt, because the original and the sculpt are sharing the same UVs, so as you can see, they oops, I'm not using the right UV map. They're sharing the same UV, so you can just copy the texture onto it. That looks pretty weird, but you might use that weirdness as a layer in Photoshop or something. I use KRITA, and I will show you my process in KRITA shortly. 6 o'clock. It's been about an hour and 13 minutes. I know because my Brahms Requiem is over. This dirt mask can be used right away as something like a roughness for the specular map. Make this a little bit darker so we can see the specular map. Or let me just give it something to reflect real quick. Let's use a sky texture. And instead of cycles, I'm going to look dev. Can't really tell that it's doing anything right now. We'll be able to tell later. Oh, that's why it's not doing anything. Duh. I didn't have that texture plugged in. Stupid. And obviously you need to plug the shader in if you want to see the output. So right now I've just plugged the dirty vertex colors in. Let's see it without the normal map. And you can see what it does to the specular reflections. Whoops. See what it does to the highlight. So you might be able to just skip painting a specular map if you use dirty vertex colors. You might not. But it really helps me a lot in my process. Usually you can multiply your specular map by this and get a little bit more detail for free. And in fact, let's do that real quick. Multiply these guys and just see what we get. Now, roughness is black is less rough and white is more rough. So if you want to have the opposite effect, just divide it. And now it's making it more rough instead of less rough. Kind of confusing. Usually I invert the texture. Whoops. Usually I invert the texture by subtracting it from 1. And now you can see it's very rough. Doesn't reflect much. In fact, it's far too rough. Put it in the specularity. Just see what happens. It's just fun to play around with. Sorry, I'm getting distracted here. It's about time to paint the base color. So how we're going to do that is mix with the normals before we go any further. And I'm going to show you how to combine the texture from the image painting, the surface that you paint onto it. Create a normal map from that and combine it with the sculpt normal map to get a better normal map. But the purpose of doing it with a sculpture is that it results in a better quality normal map, basically. And you can do some stuff with the geometry to make the corners look beveled, and it's a lot easier to do that with sculpting than it is by painting it. Anyways, I want to use the sculpt geometry. Let's set it back to object color, and let's set it back to matte cap. This one, that's white. We want to use the white one. We also want to be in texture painting. I don't like to use flat colors. I like to use the studio light, or the matte cap, so that I can see what I'm doing. You can change the opacity of this if you want to see the model underneath. Let's go back to our shading tab real quick and make a new texture. Shift D to duplicate. Press the little number next to it. We're going to call this one Tower Cap Albedo. And here's what we're going to do to save ourselves a little bit of time. We're going to go ahead and grab those reuse UVs in the UV node. And we're going to have the unique UVs. And we're going to duplicate our albedo map. Make sure to set these guys to sRGB color space. And we're going to start by working with the reuse UVs map. And it's easiest to get this if you've already created the geometry, but if for some reason you haven't created it, then what you need to do is you need to do it far before you sculpt it. You need to make sure the seams are the same symmetrically. Then you unwrap it, and it will give you this unique UV pattern here. And then what you do is you just grab this island, and this island, and this island, and this island, and you put them all on top of each other so that they're matching. And this island, and this island, and this island, and this island. And you put them on top of each other so they're matching. And that way they're all sharing the UV space. And that's what I did here. I actually unwrapped it a little bit differently for this one, but it's not going to matter. And the reason I unwrapped it differently is because I'll get slightly better results this way. So first we're going to paint onto the symmetrical texture. Make sure we click on this guy, and over here in texture, paint, paint. Cool. Texture slots, we want to go to Tower Cap Albedo 1, and for some reason it copied the because I made a duplicate of the other one. Sorry about that. So let's just set this to strength 1. The fill brush, and maybe a threshold, but I don't see it. Where is our threshold? Maybe they changed that. Oh, that's annoying. I'll just use the brush to do it real quick. Just make it white. Now go back to our fill and let's make it kind of a medium gray. Whoops. Doesn't matter if it's perfect. And we're going to start by painting in symmetry. X and Y like earlier. Well, it's not necessary because the UV map we're using actually. Huh. I guess it's not necessary to do that UV trick at all, since you can just paint in symmetry. But I'm going to do it anyway so I can show you what the workflow is like for that. Because well, yeah, that was, I never even thought of that. I forgot that you could do that. I used to use Blender a long time ago, before it even had this feature. So I'm still using the old method. Sorry about that. Alright. So, go ahead and grab this, whoops, make a duplicate of that. And let's not change the original. Make a duplicate, use this cloud texture, just to give it some some strangeness. And you know what? Let's go ahead and hide all but one side of this, so that we don't even need to see any of that other stuff. Now I should be able to just, oops, they're still connected by this one. Hide that. Hide that. So we're going to do this. We're going to add these guys to a group. We're going to call that group mask. Get us a mask modifier. Mask modifier. There's the mask group. There. And if you want to just improve the performance a little bit, actually I don't think any of that's necessary. It's got less to compute now that there are fewer faces, so that does improve the performance a bit. And of course, if you got Substance Painter, use that. But maybe you don't have Substance Painter. Maybe you don't want to use Substance Painter. I certainly don't after they got bought out by Adobe. I'm probably going to switch to Armor 3D for my texture painting soon, but I haven't had time to figure out how to use it yet. As you can see, Blender stencils the texture on based on your camera's point of view. So if you're like this, it'll be long and stretched out, which might be what you're going for. It's just like Mari in that regard, except with Mari you're drawing on the screen. The screen's made of glass, and you have to apply the texture to put it onto the object. Sort of. That makes sense. For now, I'm just trying to create some variety on the texture, and that's good enough. So what I'm going to switch to now is just a regular brush, but I'm going to start adding some color tones to it. There's something you rarely see in that blizzardy style, which I haven't done a very good job of doing on the sculpt. By that I mean I've done a really bad job of doing in the sculpt. It was just awful. I'm so sorry. I'm better than that, except I was nervous earlier, and I'm still kind of nervous. But my expectations of myself have gone down. Oops. But right now I'm just building up a base, which is gonna be just setting up some oops, just some notes of color in gray. We're gonna cover over this with a dark gray again later, but that's why I don't really care if it's got those weird looking jaggy artifacts. That's just what happens when you paint. But just changing the color frequently kind of makes it look like a neutral gray as long as you're the same tone each time. You can kind of see that. Just do some dots. Or you can set the brush to jitter a little bit if you want to do that. You don't even have to set up a really high jitter amount and do that. I might set it to something like 12. Easy. Oops. Sure, that's fine. Oops. Now let's switch back to the textured one. A little bit of a darker gray. And instead of doing it in the 3D view, I'm going to do it over here, because I don't want to have that clipping problem that I've been having. And the texture is a little bit slower in the 2D view. The 3D texture, it doesn't really need to do all that work, but it is. And that's why it's kind of slow. Usually I use KRITA to do my texture painting, but I'm not quite there yet. Maybe do a little bit cooler of a gray. If you have problems with it bleeding over like that, what you can do is you can just select the faces you want to work on, go back to texture paint mode, in edit mode you want to select them. And now it's not even thinking about all the other stuff. And switch to this back orthographic view, and now it's not having that perspective get in the way either. And of course you could use another mask modifier and a vertex group to I need it no more. This part's small, we're not going to see it, so I'm not going to bother to do a really great job on it. And now there's a lot of dead air because my music stopped. I didn't have a backup plan for what else to play. I was just going to repeat it on loop, but I think that's what I'm going to do. I'll just start it right back over. E. And if I wasn't just trying to be quick and lazy, I would mask that part out. Go ahead and save this real quick. I'm going to save this as albedo, which is a fancy word for color. Basically, I mean, that's not true at all, but it's a fancy word for the color that it reflects. Sort of. For some reason, I've been working on the original geometry. I meant to work on the sculpt. And I'm going to work on the one with the modifier. Lower the preview amount. We're going to do the same thing we did earlier with the vertex groups. And I'm going to go ahead and select linked flat faces. Right click on that and assign that to your quick favorites. Assign that to a new group. We're going to call this group mask, just like earlier. Oops, flat faces. We delimit it by, no we can't delimit it by UVs. So I'm just going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. Assign that. Oh, guess I could have just done that. They're sharing UVs, so... Oops. Mask modifier. And since we're using the symmetrical UV, we don't need to see the rest of it. It's a little bit weird. Oh, that's... There we go. If you want to make the UVs perfect on the other guy, then... Well, as you can see, it's smoothing out the corners there. Well, it's not smoothing the corners, but maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about. Just tweak this until you're happy with it. I'm gonna leave it how it was because it doesn't matter. Well, probably set it to sharp since we're really interested in the texture that gets applied in the low poly version. And you can see how the geometry looks now. Since we want this to affect our painting, there's a few things we can do. If you want to get some detail for free, go over to your tool menu and options, cavity mask. Now it's going to paint on the tops, but not on the bottom or something like that. Maybe it's vice versa. And see what that looks like. Let's get something a little bit lighter for our color. And this is the same menu as this one. It's duplicated just because sometimes you want to maximize your view. In fact, I should be in the texture painting view for this. Sometimes I move back and forth and don't even remember. Pretty easy to do that. Takes Blender a second to think when you're using the cavity mask. You can turn off occlude and it will improve the performance, but you might do that. So this is where that masking thing really comes in handy. Alright, so I'm showing the cavity mask. Let me just exaggerate the effects of this. And you can see we get some detail just for free if we use the cavity mask. Zoom in and see that in the texture. And this is another one of the reasons why it's good to sculpt the geometry first. And if you want this to affect just the tops, then go ahead and reset the view, or I guess that's not necessary. Just flip it. And now it's only going to affect the now it's only going to affect the inside of the cracks and the crevices. So I'll go ahead and use a darker color for that, something warmer maybe. I don't know. You can see we get a whole lot of detail here for free. I'm just using the default brush with the clouds texture on it. And this is one of the nice things about using a 3D painting application. You can't do this in Photoshop or KRITA because it doesn't know anything about the geometry. How could it? Not the cavity mask now and just add some and at some point I'll give a detailed demonstration maybe of these tools. It's mostly pretty self-explanatory. Very similar options to the ones you get in Photoshop or KRITA or whatever. You know, click or use your pen tip to paint and I'll really use the cavity mask while I'm doing this. But just a little bit. And of course, whatever style you want to use is fine. I'm just creating a quick demonstration. Doesn't necessarily have to be good for what I'm doing. And the higher this is set to, vertically, the less of an effect the geometry is going to have on it. And the further to the left it is, the more that value, that opacity, correlates to that amount of height, basically. So as you can see, it's not having much of an effect. Now it's having a little bit more of an effect in the areas that are. So I'm going to make this part look like paint on top of the rock. I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit. I'm going to turn on the cavity mask. And before I do this, let me turn on the face mask. And that is real annoying. I think you can turn that off. Oh. Here's how you can do that. Set this to flat and to texture. You know what, I don't think I ever turned off symmetry, did I? Oh, okay, I did. A bit more bluish. I remember there was some sort of red motif on the one my friend was working on, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Jittering. A little red. Maybe a little. I don't know, symbol here. I don't know what the symbol means. Hopefully I didn't just draw something that's a gang sign or something. And I still have the cavity mask on, so you can see it's affected a little bit by the geometry. And I'm not bothering to be even about this. So let's just see what this looks like. Let's save the image first of all. Go back to our original geometry and let's turn off the mask modifier. And now you can see what this looks like. Let's go in look dev mode. And overlays back on. And you can kind of see what I should have switched back to Eevee. Let's switch back to Eevee. Sky texture doesn't work in Eevee, so we're going to remove that. And now it's just very dark. Make this light a little bit brighter. Duplicate him a couple of times. And you're getting those jaggies in the shadows, and that's just because the shadows are set to something real low. Turn it up a little bit. I like to use VSM, a little bit nicer. Use a little bit more memory. And we can see what it might look like in the game engine. Let me put the normals back in there. And the dirt map as our roughness. For now. I've got it set a little bit too high for my stream and for my performance. But just pivot around the 3D cursor so I can show you. Obviously it's too shiny right now. We're going to change that later with the specular map. So at this point, when I'm kind of happy with this symmetrical texture, what I can do is I can go over here and click on unique UVs, make that the one we're rendering with, and go back to cycles. Because cycles is the only one that has baking support right now. Eevee is still brand new. In fact, it's not even new yet, it's in beta. So it doesn't even exist yet, it's not out yet. Excuse me. We don't need to connect them, we don't need to unconnect them, whatever. And we're going to go to the albedo.000, or the first albedo texture. We're going to plug this into the surface, just like before. We're going to set this to emit, just like before. And make sure you have the unique UV albedo selected. Go ahead and give that a bake. That didn't quite work. That's weird. It's kind of weird that it didn't work correctly. And hide everybody. Oh, it's because it uses the render settings of your modifier. So you just make sure they're all disabled in the viewport and in the render. Try that again. And of course you have to make sure you have the unique UV map selected. Yeah, there we go, good. Make sure to save this. We can overwrite the albedo map from earlier. Or we can, let's rename that one before we overwrite it. I'll have to open up my file explorer and do it there. Under tutorial, etc. Stream 2019. Call this one symmetrical. And of course, you lose a little detail when you bake it like this, but that's okay. Go. Save that. And now on this one, we can feel free to add all kinds of individual details to different parts. And I'm going to do that in KRITA to show you how I work in KRITA. So let's go ahead and save this. You'll notice that I didn't save throughout the whole stream. That's mostly because I didn't bother to, but it's also because I trust Blender, because it autosaves for me every minute, and because it rarely crashes. So, I like to use KRITA to do my painting. And you can find KRITA at krita.org. Make sure you get it from krita.org. You can find it in other places on the internet, like Softonic, or there's download sites. But you want to get it from the original, website, because that way you know it's coming directly from the developers and it hasn't been tampered with. Sometimes people like to pack viruses and adware and malware into those installers they put on Softonic. Generally, SourceForge is pretty safe too, but I tend to always go to the original developers' websites. I make sure I'm getting free and open source software. And if it's something that's well known, then I know it's safe. If it's something that's not very well known, I always like to look it up a little bit. But KRITA is quickly becoming the standard painting application among open source people, and it's really very popular for everyone. Everyone uses KRITA. It's really, really good. So, after you've installed or downloaded KRITA or whatever. And actually, none of the applications I use need to be installed. You can use a portable version of any of them, especially Blender. I rarely actually install Blender the right way. Make a new file. I'm going to use the same dimensions that we were using earlier. And 8 bits is fine. We've been painting in 16 bits, but 8 bits is fine. Go ahead and create that. Layer. Let's import some layers. We're going to go to the same place we've been saving our files to. Our project folder, Let's go ahead and import all of these as layers. And it's going to ask us to change the color space. It looks like this one's wrong, so let's fix that. Let's get rid of that one and redo that one. I should have been saving it in 8 bits and making sure I was in sRGB. That's my fault. I'm going to bring this in as a linear color space. Now I'm going to convert it. Oops. Okay, just forget about that. Did I make it wrong? Okay, for the color texture, you're just gonna have to save it in 8-bit. That's why it's doing that. At least I think so. Let's double check. You're taking so long, Blender. Make sure we are in RGB. I might have just started it with the wrong color space. Color space is such a vexing issue. I wish I never had to think about it. But you do have to think about it, unfortunately. And there we go, it's good now. Get rid of that normal map, we don't need it right now. The occlusion map, it's nice. Let's just hit that with a blur really quickly. Gaussian blur, set it to be like really soft. That's fine. And now to restore some of the detail, we'll use an unsharp mask. Sure. still a little bit wonky in places, so maybe I'll go back and use a bigger Gaussian blur. Not that big. Is it Gaussian or Gaussian? I don't know. I usually say Gaussian because he was German. So I think it was pronounced Gauss. There. But most people say Gaussian, so maybe that's how I should say it. Oh, I think it's Gaussian. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Let's just overwrite this real quick. We can always bake it again if we did something wrong. Or you can be careful and not overwrite it. I like to live on the edge. PNG. Let's not store the alpha channel, we don't need it right now. Yeah, that's fine. Black and white textures, I usually don't save them as sRBG, but there's no reason not to. Anyways, the main thing we want to do is work on this guy, so let's just play around with some mixing layers. And I always try to paint my textures in a way that gives me the most interesting look with the least amount of work. Because gosh darn it, I'm not very good at painting. You might be. If my friend is still watching this, if you made it this far, then I know you are. Ooh, that's cool. Those are new. No idea what they do. Ooh, not implication. That's got a weird look to it. Multiply. Multiply always looks good. Subtract. Normal. Overlay. KRITA's got so many so many different mix layers that you can just get so many effects just by changing the mix layers. It's pretty cool. But I don't like that. Multiply it a little bit. And in fact, since I've already saved the edit I made to this guy, I'm gonna go ahead and blur him out again. Since this time I'm just trying to work on the image texture. So, and if you want to do something, create a transparency mask. Grab one of the many excellent brushes that KRITA comes with. I really love KRITA's brushes. Oops. And you can start changing the effect of the, oops. I'm used to Blender shortcuts. KRITA's awesome. You press and hold shift to increase the size of the brush. And this kind of makes it look cleaner or dirtier in areas, which I really like. I wasn't even really planning for that, it's just sort of how it happens. And I wouldn't recommend making any big edits at this, to the overall colors of things in KRITA, because you want to do that in 3D so you can not mess up the seams here, but you can also fix that later on. Why am I not maximized? Sorry about that. You can also set it to white and reverse the effect of the layer mask. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm gonna grab my dirt mat. And that's pretty great Let's just increase the contrast on him a little bit. Auto contrast is fine. We're gonna set this one to overlay. Oops, I don't have any favorites yet. Yes. Gonna use overlay on this guy, and you can see what that does to the corners and stuff. It gives it a really nice look. And again, this is something we're getting for free just because we did the sculpture earlier. So you can begin to see that when I do it right, when I don't fumble around wasting time trying out new brushes, this creates a lot of the stuff we get for free later on down the line. And you can get a lot of texture out of it just by using a textured brush like this. And I would recommend doing the sculpture kind of asymmetrically. But you see my workflow for doing it in symmetry, and of course Blender's got symmetry tools, which I'd kind of forgotten about. But duplicate that down. This one, let's multiply this one. What's this do? No. Cool. Maybe we'll settle with that one. A little bit more subtle with that one too. So you can see the difference that made here. Not sure that it's better, but it's definitely different. Do some stuff with the color real quick, just so I can show off some of KRITA's cool features. I'm not much of a painter, but you sort of see what the brushes are like. You get some really nice watercolory brushes with KRITA. Nice. And right now it's just using the layer underneath it as the source for its mixing. But it will also prefer to mix with its own layer. And you know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to use this layer to create some like grunge and dirt. And I really like for toony style, or for just for a painterly style in my textures, I like to use KRITA because the brushes are just so good for that style. And you can see I'm not even much of a painter, but I'm getting quite a nice effect from this. And I'm probably not going to bother to do this with every part of the... I'm going to make sure I do it on all of these guys so that I don't get a drastically different look on the... switch to an eraser. Or you can hit the E key and quickly switch the brush you're using to an eraser. Actually, that's the best way to do it. I think KRITA is the best painting application I've ever used. The brush engine is just wonderful. Doesn't cost anything for what that's worth. I don't mind spending money on software, and I have plenty of times. But for me, the advantage of having free and open source software, the freedom I get from that just far outweighs the rare situation where it's not as good, in my opinion. I mean, there are definitely environments where you just don't have much of a choice. If you're doing photorealistic textures for a blockbuster movie, you've got to use Mari. I mean, even Substance Painter's not up to the task. And I hate that. I hate monopolies. I hate that that's the way it is, but that's the way it is. And if you're in the situation where you just have to deal with that, you've just got to deal with that. But I don't have to deal with that just yet. For now, I can produce quality stuff with open source software. And I can do my work on any computer anywhere without spending a lot of money. The portability is really what makes a difference to me. You know, when I get into the habit of using expensive stuff like Marvelous Designer, I love Marvelous Designer. It's awesome, but I can only use it on my own computer. You know, I can't take it to the school computer or to my friend's house or anything like that. So if I'm going to demonstrate it to other people, I have to do a video like this. Or if I'm going to use it in a group project, then I can't actually show up unless I use my own laptop, which isn't really strong enough to use Marvelous Designer because it's a really computer-intensive software. So anyways, open source stuff is great, because even in the situations where it's not as good, like for clothing, Marvelous Designer is the clear front runner. There is no competition. Not Houdini, not Maya, not 3ds Max. Nothing can even approach what MD does. Certainly not Blender. There is a pretty good add-on that helps it, but nothing can approach Marvelous Designer in that aspect. And that might be how you feel about Substance Painter or Mari or whatever for texture painting. You might even feel that. You might even feel that way about about Photoshop or something. And if you feel that way about Photoshop, you're just wrong. But that's mostly a joke. But it's not. It's not really. KRITA is great. There might be a specific feature that you love that is missing, though, and if that's the case, that's just how it is, and use what you like. But I'm showing you what I like to use, because I like to use it. Oop, I got a message. Who did I get a message from? Get the sounds. I don't know where they're coming from. Well, I don't really care about that. I'm in the middle of something. Sorry about that. I need to practice this streaming thing because I might enjoy doing a little bit more scripted so that I don't get so off the rails. And I just need to get less nervous about doing this. Because really that's the part that makes it hard. Now that I've already made a few mistakes and stuff, you know, I'm not nervous anymore. Earlier I was. Add some highlights real quick in a couple of places. Whoops. And then I'll be done with this. In fact, I think I'm going to do the highlights on... Make these guys a group. A new layer here. Oops, a new layer. Here. Put this to, I don't know, soft light or something. Lighten. Soft light. I don't like that. No. Actually, screen is what I usually use for this. I don't like that at all. Good night. I want to keep the color for this. I want it to be kind of desaturated, but not fully. At least for right now. I can make a duplicate of the layer and set it to screen if I just wanted to have a stronger effect. I've been doing all of this at 100% opacity so I can see it, but I'm probably going to tweak the opacity of each layer in a second. I'm just trying to add some detail and some texture so that the sides look a little bit different since I made them symmetrical earlier. And KRITA's brushes are great, so I feel like I get a lot of that for free just by using the nice brushes. Of course, that's a bad habit to get into if you do a lot of painting, but I don't do a lot of painting. So it's probably an even worse habit for me to get into, since I don't know enough to get away with it. But, I mean, I'm being pretty hard on myself, but I'm really not much of a painter. I like painting. Someday I want to be good at it, but... Oops, I didn't do anything on them. I probably will want to later. Just a little bit. But this doesn't have to be awesome. And let's see. Let me just tweak the opacity of these layers. Hit that one. Make this one a mix between multiply and normal. Fine. And this one. I'm gonna make that one a mix between thin light and screen. And make it pretty subtle. And I tend to save my KRITA project as a .kra, which is the KRITA project. And unfortunately that usually creates a pretty big file size, so you might not want to do that. You might want to just save your texture inversions. That's also fine. But I just do that to prevent myself from overwriting it. Okay. See how this looks. Go back into Blender and click on the image editor and hit Alt-R to reload the texture. Have the wrong texture in there. Here's the normal map going. Let's put that in there in the roughness. And are we in cycles? Let's go back to easy. Let's see how it's gonna look. I'm sorry, I'm talking really quietly. I probably haven't been audible in the mic this whole time. Sorry about that. I don't mean to mumble, but I do. It's just who I am. This is starting to look a little bit nicer. I actually think I was a little bit too intense with the dirt and stuff, so let me go back and fix that. And this is why I saved the KRITA project file. Because I can, especially if it's on a big asset that's kind of important. Over here and reload it. Looks a little bit better. And this was easy, even if it's not 100% great. I think it's good enough. I didn't really have a specific style that I was going for because I'm not, this is a demonstration. I'm not the one making the thing, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add detail to the roughness. I'm going to make a roughness map and a specular map. I'm going to add detail to it based on the albedo texture that I just painted. But first I think I'm going to improve the normal map using the albedo texture that I just painted. Let's make a new KRITA project. New. Whatever. We're going to bring in our layers. In fact, cancel that. Just open it directly, that's easier. That way you don't have to deal with the color space. Open your normal map up. And I guess I was wrong, maybe you do have to deal with the color space. This RGB linear is what we want here. And import as a layer. Our albedo. And now, I'm gonna go ahead and make a desaturated copy of this. I don't want any of that in there, so any of the that right there. So I'm gonna just use luminosity. That looks really nice. Don't need the original anymore. Make a few duplicates of this. Now, when I make normal maps in KRITA, what I like to do is I like to make the normal map do a lot more than just the surface detail, but also do sort of mimic the shape a little bit more. And I do that by creating different levels of detail in the normal map and combining them. And I'll show you how to do that. So on one or two of them, I like to do a real intense Gaussian blur. Then I go up here, filter, right to normal map. And I usually use simple for this one. Set it to a really big radius. That's good. And you know what, before I do that, that background shouldn't be black, it should be gray. That doesn't really matter. But Go ahead and do it on each of these since I forgot to do it on the first one. I'm going to go back to our Gaussian blur. And pretty intense. Maybe I'll increase the contrast. That's a little bit too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the layer, run the filter that's a little bit too much, lower the opacity, and merge it down. So, height to normal map. I like to use simple for this one. That's really weird looking. That looks normal. Not sure why it's doing that. Doesn't usually do that. You know what? It was fine with the black earlier. I actually like it better. Sorry about that. It's kind of a waste of time. That's fine. Cool, alright. It's a normal map. There, now it's behaving correctly. I don't know what it was doing earlier. I think it's just because the part I was trying to push out was darker. So it was getting pushed in. That's the effect. That's what I wanted to see. Done with that layer. Now go ahead and give this one a little bit of a Gaussian blur. Not much. Go ahead and use simple. Increase the radius of that. No, I'll go ahead and blur it out a little bit more. Not that much. That's good. Because I'm trying to create different detail levels in the normal map. And that's closer to what I wanted. Although, for whatever reason, some of these are turning out to be kind of dark. Not really sure why they're doing that, but that's easy enough to fix. Just the blue channel I need to fix. Whoops. Darn it. Doesn't look like it's doing anything. Doesn't make any sense. There, that's what I want to do. I just want to make sure they're all about the same brightness level. For some reason affecting just the blue channel wasn't working. It doesn't really matter if I do that to the other channels, I think. Could be wrong, I hope I'm not. This one, I'm gonna go with Sobel. No, I'm gonna go with simple. And for this one, I'm going to go with Sobel. Oops. That doesn't matter unless you've got a colored image. That's the channel that it reads for how high up it is when creating the normal map. For this one, I'm going to use Pruitt. Pruitt seems to preserve the details the best. I'm going to go ahead and apply the same adjustment to each one just to make sure they're all about the same. A little bit more than I want to do that. That's fine, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. That's just going to affect the intensity of the normals. The red and green channels. And the blue channel is too dark, so we need to adjust it to fix it. But the blue channel also doesn't really matter much. In fact, a lot of the time, people just throw that out when they're making a game. So, and now what I do is I order the normal maps from highest to lowest in terms of level of detail, which is why I made them in that order. And I change the mixing, it's in MISC, to combine normal map. And this is a very special mix mode that takes the detailed normal map and rotates it so that it's pointing in the direction of the base normal map, which is kind of complex, but it's true. It's hard for me to explain exactly. Hard for me to explain exactly what that means, but it's a better way of combining normal maps. See what it does there, than just mixing them. And I was wrong earlier. I want to do them in reverse order from the way I made them. For a long time I didn't understand what I was doing, so I did them in the wrong order like that. But I'll go ahead and make them into a group. And I probably made more normal maps than I really need to. So I'm going to go ahead and build this guy. And it's important, you don't want it to get bright green or bright red anywhere like that. So that's why I am careful to change the opacity. But that's pretty good. We're gonna go with that one. So I'll go ahead and save my my KRITA project. Save as. I don't think it's necessary to choose it in the list, but I'm going to do it anyways. Replace that. And now in Blender, Alt R, and ooh, that's too strong now. Now you can see what it does to the normals, and it's actually a lot nicer. which means I think I baked it incorrectly earlier. So I kind of want to go back and bake it again, using a different method. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do that now. The one that had the modifiers applied earlier is what we'll use. And for this method, what we're going to do is we're going to do selected to active. So select the sculpt first and then the low poly. Let's just duplicate our normal map. Switch back to cycles. Go down to our bake menu. And what do I want to do? I want to do normals. Tangent space, XYZ. If you're using Unreal Engine, I didn't mention this, but if you're using Unreal Engine, you might need to change the swizzle. And you should do that once you finish the normal map. And you can do that in KRITA by... flatten the image real quick. In KRITA, you can do that by on your color adjustment curves, on your G channel, and just going weasel. And now it will work in Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine is based on DirectX, so it's different than everything else. But I'm going to bake it plus X plus Y plus Z because that's what KRITA generates the normal maps in, and I'm going to swizzle it afterwards if I need to, which I don't, but you might. We're going to check selected to active, and probably aren't going to need that. If we do end up needing it, then we'll mess with that, but I don't think we need to. Take that. Whoops. I want to make sure it's not connected. Anything? We want to make sure we have the right one selected. And bake it. And it may or may not work. I just want to see if I did it wrong earlier and if this is better. It's better in the places where it worked, so we're going to have to turn on cage. Try that again. I don't think I ever explained what baking is. Baking, obviously, is where you take the texture that's going into the rendering engine, and there we go, and you save it. And the way it works is it treats every face of the object like its own tiny camera, and it takes a picture, for every face on the object. So the number of faces the object has increases the amount of time it takes to bake. The number of samples you're using increases the time because it is rendering. So as you can see, this gave us much nicer results. I should have done that to begin with. And in fact, let's just see what that looks like. Yeah, much nicer results. I should have done that to begin with. That's the way I usually do it, but I thought it's been a long time since I've used... I actually haven't ever used Bake from Multi-Res before because I always do it this way. I thought it would save me a step, and I'm paying for it now. You can see that gives us much nicer results. And now we can combine that with this guy, or with this one. That's pretty nice also. So I'm going to go ahead and save the bake from Blender. Shoot, I accidentally overwrote it. That's okay. Because I have it open in KRITA. Import. And that's why I saved my KRITA. Oh, and KRITA is great. It autosaves too. I'll open the autosave file. Combine normal map. Bam. Easy, easy. Just gonna overwrite that. Because we can bake it again anytime. Now, reload it. And it's subtle, the difference between the two, but you can see it's got a much nicer result. And now we're going to go ahead and make a specular and a roughness map for this guy, KRITA. Oh no, I couldn't save. I'm sorry. Thank you, I don't need to save you. Flatten image. And I'm gonna say the painted part, the sort of grayish part, is gonna be less shiny, and the bluish part's gonna be more shiny. So just try to isolate that. It's not gonna do it. Although I do want to raise the contrast. Let's just take the blue and whoa. Just trying to increase the contrast between the different parts so it'll be easier to mask them out. Red. And it does not appear that I'm really doing a good job at that. That should be good enough. Let's go ahead and desaturate that. Minimum, or you know what, that's not good enough. Okay, let's do it this way. HSV? No. Color balance, that's what I want to do. That's not what I want to do. Alright, I think I'll just use the color select. Similar colors. And they're too similar. Gosh darn it. Okay. And I'm going to do it this way. Part right there isn't actually mapped to the object, so it doesn't really matter if it's not perfect, but and now I'm just going to with the fill brush, set that to fill entire selection, and lighten that a little bit. Now let's desaturate you. And it's ugly, so because it's so ugly, I'm just gonna select that. go over here and I'm going to make that black just because it bothers me that it's different. Oh, it's been 2 hours and 2.5 hours now. We'll listen to the Requiem again. I don't care. And let's increase the contrast on this. Contrast, maybe? No. There we go. Something like that. I'm gonna go ahead and blur this layer a bunch. And I'm gonna desaturate this one too. And overlay them. And I'm gonna mix it just a little bit, or multiply it a little bit. No, I'm gonna mix it a little bit. These interpolation things are kind of weird. That's interesting. I think what that does is it takes the first pixel and the second pixel, or the layer on top, the pixel from the layer on the top and the pixel from the layer on the bottom, and just finds the halfway spot between them. I have no idea what it does. It's a new layer blend mode. And I'm going to take this original guy. And I'm going to... Sorry, wrong one. I'm going to desaturate this one also. I'll use max. And I'm going to grain merge. No, I'm not. I'm going to do a little bit of grain merge and a little bit of Alanon. And this will work fine for our specular map. Or our specular roughness map. I'll save this as our roughness map. No I won't. To make up my mind is what I should do. Specular map's what I'm gonna do. And now for roughness. I'm just gonna do an unsharp mask on this. Let's see what that does. And I'm going to import my dirt and my ambient inclusion from earlier. I'm gonna blur it as I did before. And again, I'm gonna do some of the same adjustments I did before just because I liked how they looked. Overlay. Overlay. And I'm gonna change that one to multiply. Just do it a little bit. Like, I'm being quiet again, I'm sorry. I need to speak up so the mic can hear me. And now I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to set this one to overlay also. And I'm just going to use... Oops. The purple ones down here are the ones that are kind of wet brush texture. And they look awesome. Put this to normal for now so I can just see what it looks like. That's obviously not what I want it to look like. I'm just trying to make it a little bit more random. In fact, I'm going to use this brush, because I like this brush. And like usual, I'm trying to get the most, just the most interesting texture for the least amount of work. I want to try to work efficiently, especially since this stream is already 2 hours long. And I'm going to switch to black. Nah, I'm not liking that. Something more textured. There we go. Put some splatter brushes in here there. Nice. There. Cool. Set that to overlay. Make it pretty subtle. And that'll work. So this is our roughness. And I might need to do some adjustments in Blender to make them do what I want. I don't even need that other UV map or the UV node or anything like that anymore, but I have them just because it doesn't make a difference. And so it's everywhere that's black is where it's going to be less rough, and everywhere that's white is where it's going to be rougher. I don't want it to be like this, so we're going to invert it by subtracting it from 1. And it's okay that we're using a regular math node because that converts it to black and white, which is what we want anyways. And now... clamp it and offset it a little bit. Huh. It doesn't make a difference. It seems to really be messing with the contrast. Let me use a color ramp to do this instead. Flip. Okay, that was working correctly. But spline. Color ramp is nice because it lets us sort of choose a mid-level. And if you want to save it out like this, you do the same thing. You go to Emit, turn off selected to active, and you can bake that out and save that as your roughness texture. The specular one should be good as it is, but just see what it looks like. I think I will increase the contrast on that one. No, that's too much contrast. I don't want it to quite reach black anywhere. But I don't mind it being dark in places. Because it's going to be less reflective there. See what that looks like. And now this is without the texture. Honestly, the normals are a little bit too strong. In most cases, you can do these kinds of adjustments in your game engine, or whatever. And Eevee is great because it looks very similar to the shaders that people use in a game workflow. For the roughness map, I typically don't have a lot of contrast. Since I want it to be a little bit shiny everywhere. But you know what? In KRITA, is this my roughness? Yes, it is. I just want to have a little bit more, so I'm going to use G-Mic Cute to, and you could do this in Blender. Actually, it'd probably be faster. Since I obviously don't know exactly what I'm doing here. Patterns. Give clouds or plasma. I'll just use Blender to do it. So here in Blender, and we will have to bake this one out. Go ahead and create a noise texture. Mix RGB node. We're gonna overlay that. Use the factor input, not the color input. And make it nice and big scale. And you can, am I still in cycles? I'm in cycles. You can see what that does. You could probably actually do the procedural textures in the game engine. I know you can do that in Godot, so I'm sure you can do it in Unity. And as you can see, it really does work real nice. So if you want to bake it out, bake it out. If you don't, then don't. I don't think I'm going to. I like the flexibility that using nodes gives me to do this. I typically test the normals and the speculars when I don't have an image texture, so I can see what it looks, you know, what the effect is going to be like when I do have the image texture on there. And I usually set it to be pretty dark so I can see the highlights. Man, I told. A little bit of metalness actually might look nice. Plug this guy back in and see what we got. There. Oops, don't wanna move it. And then if you can use a few more polygons. Oops. and I'd recommend beveling the corners a little bit. But as you can see, that makes it a little bit less low poly. And that makes it less even looking. But if nothing else, just bevel the corners. Look how much of a difference that makes. Depends on your polygon budget for your game or whatever. And if that's too shiny, what we can do is we can, first of all, we can just multiply the specular by half. And that's going to reduce the brightness of the reflection. And we can do the same thing to the roughness, but we want to add to this one. And this is going to make it less reflective. Or it's going to change the size of the reflection, actually. So this is how it just rotate it, leave it there. That looks about right. Yep, I'm pretty happy with that. And now at this stage, what I would probably do is go ahead and save it. I'd go into KRITA. Since this is going into a game, go into KRITA, and for each texture, you might want to reduce its size. And I typically like to use this filter. It does a good job preserving detail. I'm gonna go ahead and do this with every texture and just see what I get. Oops, I gotta scale it first. Did I already do that? I must have already done that. There it is. Oh, I forgot to change the filter for the last one. Okay, it doesn't really matter. And I just like to paint at a higher resolution than my final asset. You don't have to do that, but it helps you get more detail and make decisions about how to reduce the detail. Anyways, now we can replace the image with the low poly version, the low resolution version. And we don't have to You don't have to change your shader at all. Blender's kind of peculiar in the way that it handles images, but the image data block in Blender holds a reference to an image, so you can change what image it's referencing and not change the data block, and you can use the same image data block. And it looks the same. So you can see, let's save this as a different file. And I'm very happy with the lighting. A little bit easier to tell what's going on when you just have one light. That flattened it out a bit, but it still looks pretty good. Of course, it looks better with the higher resolution textures. But it's not a huge difference. Probably increase the strength of the normal map to compensate. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Okay. Well, that's my workflow. Let me just see if I missed anything. I don't think I did. So, I'm gonna go probably edit this a bunch and put it on YouTube or something. But that's the way that I tend to approach painting assets. And, I know this was a long demonstration, but that actually is a faster way of doing it. If you want to get a really nice quality. And, you can work a lot more efficiently. If you're doing 15 or 20 assets, you paint each one, or you sculpt each one, then you do the bakes, and then you paint each one, and you do it in stages. You don't want to do them all one at a time like this, because that would take a long time. A lot of the times you can reuse textures from object to object. There's something called trim sheets that is a really great way of saving time. I didn't do that in this demonstration, because there are other people that have made tutorials for that are honestly better than anything I'm going to be able to make. But I need to practice. This was one of the first times I've done this, so I'm not going to beat myself up about it. And I think the result is alright. So, I guess I'm done then. Thank you for watching.